Welcome back to our new year 7s. So we are now on lesson 5 of our English bridging unit, and today we're looking at another truly remarkable human being. So we're going to be looking at NHS workers. In this lesson, we're going to focus on NHS workers, people who have worked in our hospitals, and throughout the coronavirus pandemic, all hospital staff have continued to put themselves at risk. They've made sacrifices, all for the good of our country. So, in the UK, we are fortunate enough to have a free national health service. This means that we don't have to pay for our health care. If you get poorly, if you break a bone, something goes wrong, it means that you can go to the hospital and know that you will get treatment. This means that healthcare in the UK is accessible for all. Everyone has access to it. Everyone has a right to be treated in a hospital. Whereas in some countries, you have to pay for your healthcare. So if you couldn't afford an operation, you wouldn't be able to have it. But here, if you needed an operation, the NHS would provide that for you. So what I want you to do first of all is create a list or a mind map of words that you associate with the NHS. I want you to try to include at least 5 adjectives, 5 describing words about the NHS workers. So if you put in the middle of your mind map the words NHS, and then like a spider diagram, you can have arrows coming away from that word, where you write around adjectives to describe the workers and words that you associate with NHS and hospitals in the UK. Throughout the coronavirus pandemic, NHS workers have been amazing, and we should all be so grateful to them. There are even some people who worked in hospitals who have lost their lives due to exposing themselves to the virus at work. So our today's big question is, how can we thank our heroic NHS workers? And today we are going to create a poem to give thanks to the NHS workers. Our WAC focus is ambitious vocabulary, so I want you to really think about the language you're using in the poem. Are you going to use some descriptive language? And thinking about synonyms for common words. So I don't want to see words such as good, bad, happy, sad. I want you to come up with better alternatives that are more specific, that really bring your writing to life. So let's have a look at our learning objectives. Blue, to identify some key features and ideas in poetry, and then to write with some variety of language. So the first thing we're going to do is have a look at what makes up a poem. What are some techniques we use in poetry? What are some key features of a poem? Green, to understand the techniques used by poets and the effect on the reader. To write with a good range of ambitious language and techniques. So green, we want to understand what the poetic techniques are. What effect does it have? How does it make the reader feel? And then it's being able to then use those techniques in your own writing when you create your own poem. Red, to create a poem using ambitious language and poetic techniques, to write with originality, flair and personality. Now remember, this poem is yours, so it has to be original, and we want to see your own style, your own personality come through in your writing. Meet Alana. So our 5th human is Alana. She is an NHS doctor, and she has had a very unusual few months, as you can imagine. I think she is an incredibly inspiring person, hardworking, intelligent and compassionate, and we are very lucky to hear from her today. If you click the link below, it will take you to her video. On the following slide, we've got some information retrieval questions. Now, all the answers to those questions can be found in the video. So I'd like for you to watch the video, and then on the following slide, have a go at answering the questions. There are 6 questions for you to answer. As I said before, all of the answers to the questions are in Alana's video. So if you're unsure, just pop back to the video and you can rewatch. Number 1, what is Alana's job? Number 2, what unit does she work in at the hospital? 3, why is Alana staying in a hotel room and not staying at her home with her family? 4, list 2 things that have helped Alana to feel happy throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. 5, how has the community supported hospital workers like Alana? 6, list 3 pieces of advice Alana gives for starting your new school. Once you have answered the questions, we have a scenario for you to look at. Imagine that you work in a hospital just like Alana. What do you think you would find most challenging? So think about Alana's situation, think about the job itself, being in the hospital. Think about the fact that a lot of hospital workers have been unable to see their families because they don't want to put their families at risk. So there are a lot of different challenges that you would face. So I want you to choose one thing that you think you would find the most challenging if you were working in a hospital at this time. Time for a pit stop. If you want to read up about the context, the background information behind Alana's story, research the following phrases: NHS, COVID doctors and nurses, Nightingale hospitals. There's also a great video that shows you the daily life of a Nightingale hospital colleague if you click the link below. Our main task in today's lesson will be to write a poem about the NHS and to give thanks to the NHS. So what is poetry? Poetry is a type of literature or artistic writing that attempts to stir up a reader's imagination or emotions. Poetry is an expression of emotions in words, emotions and thoughts in words. So the poet does this by carefully choosing and arranging language for its meaning, sound and rhythm. So we've got lots of different types of poems. We think about arranging the language. Poetry is usually split into stanzas. Some poetry rhymes as well, so they'll intentionally place words, rhyming words at the end of the lines, for example. Some poetry doesn't, and that's absolutely fine. Some poetry can be narrative. It might tell a story. Some poems can be funny. They can be sad. Lots of different types of poetry for lots of different purposes. But the purpose of our poem today will be to look specifically at the NHS and to give thanks to the NHS. So what I want you to do in preparation for that is answer the 3 questions below. You just need to give a brief answer for each. Number 1, how is the NHS powerful? How is it powerful? What makes it powerful? Number 2, why might you describe the NHS staff as heroic? Why might you think of them as courageous, as heroic? Think about, especially now, because of COVID-19. And then finally, question 3, what reasons do we have to be thankful for the NHS? So that 3rd question, you can answer it in bullet points if you wish. Just give some brief answers. What reasons do we have to be thankful for the NHS? Okay, so before we look at writing our very own poem, first we need to make sure that we understand some of the terminology. Now, some of you will have done this at school already. You might be looking at the definitions and the terminology on the left and be thinking, actually, I already know some of these. And if you do, fantastic. If you don't, that's also absolutely fine because we're going to go through it together. So this is a match-up activity. So on the left, we've got some terminology that relates to poetry in a list: acrostic poem, haiku, imagery, repetition, rhyme scheme, simile, stanza, and theme. Then on the right, in the boxes, we've got the definitions. So what I want you to have a go at doing now is matching up the definitions. The answers are on the next slide, so please don't skip ahead. Have a go at it independently first of all, and then once you have completed this task, we will go through it together and you can check your answers. Now we'll go through the answers to the poetry matchup activity together. So an acrostic poem is a type of poem where the lines, the words, the phrases within that poem describe a topic word, and the topic word is written vertically down the side. So each line of the poem starts with the letters of that topic word. A haiku is another type of poem, and this one is a type of Japanese poem, and it's made up of 3 lines. So it has 17 syllables in total. So if we think about what a syllable is, 1 syllable words, it's like a beat. So cat, dog, 1 syllable. And other words like teacher, student, 2 syllables. So in this poem, is divided into 3 lines. So the first line has 5 syllables, the second line 7, and then the final line has 5 syllables. So it's only a short poem and it doesn't have to rhyme. Imagery is the use of descriptive language to engage the senses of the reader. So consider the language that you use in a poem. It might be that you're describing something in detail so a person can clearly imagine it in their head, they can see it. Or it might be that you're writing to appeal to the other senses. Perhaps you're describing sounds. Perhaps you're describing the way that something smells. Perhaps you're describing how something feels. So you're really bringing your language to life using the descriptive language to create imagery. Repetition is the use of the same word or phrase multiple times. A rhyme scheme is a poet's deliberate pattern of lines that rhyme with other lines in a poem or a stanza. So it could be that the word at the end of the line rhymes with the word at the end of the following line. There are different types of rhyme scheme patterns as well. It might be that just the last 2 lines in a stanza rhyme. It might be that we've got an A-B rhyme scheme where the rhyme happens on alternate lines. Simile is a comparison using the words like or as. We've got an example. She was as courageous as a lion. So we're making that comparison using as. You could do exactly the same with like, it would have the same meaning. She was courageous like a lion. Both examples of similes. Stanza, a group of lines of poetry, usually 4 lines or more, arranged according to a fixed plan. So a stanza in poetry is a lot like a paragraph in prose in a book that you're reading. If you're reading a narrative, a storybook, the writing is split into paragraphs. So similarly in poetry, the writing is split into stanzas, and each stanza is like a paragraph and it's separated by a space from the next one. Theme. So themes are the main ideas, topics or subject of a poem. If we think about the poem you're going to be writing, it's about the NHS. In terms of theme, you might be thinking quite concrete ideas, the hospital. But themes could be emotions or ideas that aren't tangible. So you might use the theme of courage. She was courageous as a lion. Courage. How are our NHS staff courageous? That might be a theme that recurs throughout your poem. So have a think about what sort of themes you might use in your poem. Before writing your own poem, we're going to have a look at 2 examples of poetry about the NHS. And then you're going to answer some questions on each of these poems. So the first poem is only a short one because it's a haiku. It's called Haiku for the NHS and it's written by Sarah Purvis. A nurse with tired eyes, her golden heart is breaking beneath her disguise. So even though the poem is only short, it gives us a lot of information. There is a lot that we can start to pick apart and interpret from this poem. So what I want you to do is answer the questions around the outside. I will go through them with you. I want you to have a go at answering them independently. Question 1. We're looking at that phrase, tired eyes. How do the words tired eyes present the nurse as a hard worker? If you're unsure about the definitions, at the bottom here, we've got present. So to present, it's a verb, it's a doing word, and it means to show or portray a person or character in a certain way. So how do the words tired eyes show that the nurse is a hard worker? How do the words tired eyes present the nurse as a hard worker? So I want you to think about what that means. Briefly have a go at answering that question. Question 2. Why has the writer used the metaphor golden heart to describe the nurse? So let's remind ourselves, a metaphor is where you make a comparison by telling the reader that something is something else. So when we use a simile, we make a comparison using like or as. But a metaphor is where we say that something actually is something else. So we've got 2 examples here. A white blanket of snow. The snow isn't actually a blanket. That's a metaphor. Life is a roller coaster. Well, life isn't actually a physical roller coaster, so that is a metaphor. So here, golden heart. The nurse's heart isn't literally made out of gold. So what do we think that means? Why has the writer used the metaphor golden heart to describe the nurse? So what does that suggest about her golden heart? Answer that question. And then what does the line suggest about the nurse? So we're looking at line 2. So firstly, what do the words golden heart suggest? And then secondly, the whole line says her golden heart is breaking. So what might that mean? Why might that be? Have a go at answering that question. Why do you think the writer has put that her golden heart is breaking? Why might that be? Final question. What do you think the writer means by disguise? So we've got her golden heart is breaking beneath her disguise. Think about what that word disguise means. Do we think it's literal, or do we think it might be another metaphor here? What do you think the writer means by disguise? What might it represent? And finally, how does this make you feel about the nurse? A nurse with tired eyes, her golden heart is breaking beneath her disguise. How does it make you feel? Okay, so have a go at answering those questions now. The second poem we are going to look at today is These Are the Hands by Michael Rosen. So what I would like for you to do is click on the video below, watch the video, the reading of These Are the Hands, and then you're going to complete the following sentence. I believe the message of the poem is because. So on this slide we have the first 2 stanzas from the poem These Are the Hands by Michael Rosen. We've got, just like before, 3 questions around the outside that I want you to have a go at answering. So box number 1, we can see that we have arrows to the words these are the hands, these are the hands. So what technique is being used here? And what effect does it have? Question 2. The very last line of the poem is and touch us last. So how does this link to the opening lines of the poem? So here we've got the opening lines. These are the hands that touch us first. Think about what that means. They're talking about hospital workers. These are the hands that touch us first. And then the very last line of the poem is and touch us last. So how does this link to the opening lines of the poem? Question 3. The poem consists of many short lines like a list. Why do you think that the writer has set it out this way? What sort of impression does it create of the work done by hospital staff? So we've got lots of short lines like a list. These are the hands that tap your back, test the skin, hold your arm, wheel the bin, change the bulb, fix the drip, pour the jug, replace your hip. We've got no punctuation, no pause for a breath. So what effect does this have? Why do you think the writer has set it out this way? What impression does it create of the work done by the hospital staff? answer those questions now. You are going to be writing your own poem about NHS workers. So if you're stuck for ideas, I've got a list here that might help you. So what you might include. So you don't have to include all of these. These are just some ideas for you, and you might have some different ideas of your own, which is great. So things that you might include: reasons to be thankful for NHS staff. And I'm sure some of you recently as well will have been involved in going outside and clapping for our carers on a Thursday evening. So why was it we did that? What reasons do we have to be thankful for NHS staff? You might include some of the type of work done by the staff there. You might include a personal experience, an anecdote, a personal story about maybe a time that you've been in hospital. You could write about the sacrifices made by staff during the coronavirus pandemic. So what did they have to give up? What did they do? How did they put themselves at risk during the coronavirus pandemic? Or you might include some of the reasons as to why communities support their local hospital staff. Remember as well, you can use all the information that you've learned from Alana in the video. So what I would like you to do now is create a list of your main ideas. What ideas are you going to write about in your poem? So it's almost time for us to write our poems. This is what the lesson has been building up to. I want you to think back to your learning objectives. How we spoke about creating a poem with originality and flair, with your own personality coming through. So remember, this poem is yours. It can be written in any style. You can use any ideas. It's your poem. So remember, for Purple Zone, you work independently. You work in silence, so you don't ask for any help. You do this work on your own. So it is challenging, but it means that the work is completely yours, and that is a fantastic achievement. So for this task, you are going to have 15 minutes. So on the following slide, let's go through the task together. So now it's the moment where you get to be creative. You are going to create your very own poem about the power of the NHS. So remember our big question: how can we thank our heroic NHS workers? I want you to consider that question when you're writing your poem. So remember, some poems rhyme, some poems don't. It's completely up to you what form of poetry you use. You might do an acrostic poem. You might have a poem with a clear rhyme scheme. You might not. It's absolutely fine. This is your poem. You can lay it out how you like, as long as it is a piece of poetry. Use your plan to help you. So the bullet point list you made with all your ideas, make sure you use that to help you. And I want you to try to include some poetic techniques. So here's some techniques that you might include: repetition, just as we saw in these, the hands, a metaphor, a simile, imagery, so really descriptive writing, really appeal to the senses, and you might include some alliteration as well, where we have words that start with the same letter. Okay, now it's over to you. You have 15 minutes to create your poem about the power of the NHS. Before we end our lesson, I would like you to have a think about our hospital workers, our NHS staff, so our doctors, our nurses, the cleaning teams who go into those hospitals every day and clean them. What animal would you choose to best represent our NHS hospital workers? You need to justify your answer. So justify means that you give a reason to support your answer. You explain why. So you can choose any animal you like, but you must give a reason why you've chosen that animal. Got your sentence starter here. I would choose to best represent NHS hospital workers because. So represent means be a symbol for. What animal are you going to choose to represent, to be a symbol for NHS hospital workers? Write your sentence now.